Two little girls, both just 8 years old, huddled together beneath the crooked shelter at the far corner of Juniper Park. It was supposed to be a special day, their birthday, but instead of cake, laughter, and balloons, they only had each, a scrap of stale bread and a stub of a candle struggling against the twilight wind. The world had gone quiet around them. They leaned into one another for warmth, whispering their wishes into the empty air, not sure if anyone at all was listening. Their mother was gone. Their stepfather's presence was a shadow too dark and too near, and the rest of the world had already moved on, forgetting them as if they had never existed. But in the loneliest corners, when hope seems too small to survive, sometimes miracles do arrive, on four paws, and with a man who chooses to stop and see. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? The shelter they claimed as their home for the night was nothing more than four tired beams holding up a roof that sagged with age. The picnic table inside carried scars of time, carvings of initials, and the stains of years of storms. But for these two girls, it was the closest thing to safety they had managed to find all day. They sat close together, knees drawn up to their chests, while the cold September breeze tugged at their ponytails. They were twins, the kind people often stopped to admire once upon a time, when life had been better. Their thin frames spoke of restless nights and empty meals, but their faces, still soft and unshaped by years of sorrow, reminded anyone who looked closely that they were still children. Laya, the elder by only a few minutes, carried herself with a quiet firmness, the sort of determination that children should never have to wear. Protecting her sister had become her role in a world that no longer protected them. Marin, smaller and more timid, kept her fists hidden inside her sweater sleeves, her eyes always flicking to Laya before daring to speak or move. On the table in front of them sat the only gift they had, a scrap of bread wrapped in torn paper. Into the bread, Laya had pressed a stubby candle, probably dropped long ago from some forgotten pack. Marin cupped her hands around the fragile flame, shielding it against the restless wind. "Ready?" Laya whispered. Marin nodded, lips pressed together, her eyes already glistening. Together the twins closed their eyes. There was no birthday song to guide them, no voices joining in, only the faint rustle of branches overhead. Yet in their minds, they could almost hear it. The echo of their mother Hannah's off-key singing, the sound of laughter filling their old kitchen, the glow of light bouncing off frosting and plates. They could still remember their father's hands lifting them high so they could blow out candles without stretching. But those memories belonged to another life, one that felt impossibly far away now. Tonight, all they had was a flickering flame, atop a crust of dry bread. Marin's lips moved silently around her wish, too fragile to release into the air. Laya's jaw tightened as though keeping everything locked inside was the only way she could stay strong. Then, soft but steady, came a sound. Paws against the path. The girls opened their eyes. A shape moved into the doorway of the shelter. A large German shepherd, coat black and tan, stepped forward with calm certainty. His ears pricked, his gaze sharp, but there was no threat in him. He lowered his body close to the ground, watching them with patient intent. "Argo," a man's voice called gently. The girls startled. Marin's hand slipped, nearly snuffing out the fragile flame. A tall figure appeared in the fading light, his frame solid, his dark patrol jacket catching what little glow remained. A faint badge gleamed at his chest. His hair was short, dark, with threads of gray at the temples. His eyes, steady, watchful, were not hard, not cruel. They belonged to someone who had carried heavy burdens but had never let those burdens make him unkind. "I'm Officer Beckett Shaw," he said softly, crouching so he met their gaze. His voice was low, careful, the kind of voice that offered steadiness instead of fear. And this is Argo. He's trained to help people. He came here because he thought you might need a friend." The dog inched closer, his tail still, his eyes warm. Marin trembled, her hand shaking as she reached out. Her small palm touched the shepherd's fur, and when she felt the steady rise and fall of his breath, she exhaled in relief. Argo did not move except to breathe solid and warm against her hand. Beckett's eyes shifted to the table, to the small piece of bread, the candle nearly gone. His chest ached. "Is today your birthday?" he asked. Laya hesitated, then straightened. "Yes. We didn't have cake." Her voice was flat, rehearsed, as though she had already said it too many times to herself. Beckett's throat tightened. "I don't have cake either," he admitted, patting his pockets, "but I do have something." He opened his patrol bag, pulling out a small thermos. From it, he poured cocoa into 2 paper cups he carried for long shifts. "It's warm, sweet, not fancy, but it'll help." Marin looked to Laya for approval before wrapping both hands around the cup. Laya took hers slowly, cautiously. They drank in silence, shoulders loosening beneath their worn sweaters. Beckett slipped his jacket from his shoulders and draped it gently over Laya. Then he went to his car, returned with another lighter coat, and placed it around Marin, making sure her thin arms were covered. "What are your names?" he asked. "I'm Laya," the elder said firmly. "Marin," the younger whispered. "Happy birthday, Laya." "Happy birthday, Marin," Beckett said, his words steady, spoken like truth. Then he noticed what Laya was holding in her lap, a small square of blue fabric folded again and again, a handkerchief worn but clean. She pressed it to her face as if it were a treasure. "It smells like Mom," she murmured. "She had Jasmine. She's gone." "Her name?" Beckett asked softly. "Hannah," Marin answered, her eyes wet. Beckett leaned closer, catching the faint jasmine still clinging to the cloth. He didn't take it. He didn't even ask. He only nodded toward Argo. The shepherd stepped forward, nose brushing the fabric, inhaling deeply, memorizing the scent. When he looked up at Beckett, his gaze carried understanding. "That's important," Beckett told the girls, his voice low but certain. "Thank you for letting him smell it. He remembers scents forever. If we ever cross your mother's path, he'll know." The girls looked at one another, hesitant, but in their silence a seed of hope was planted. Beckett knew they couldn't stay in that cold shelter. He stepped aside, pulled out his phone. "Hi, Dana. It's Officer Shaw. I'm at Juniper Park, West Shelter. 2 minors, about 8. They're safe, but they need placement tonight. Yes, I'll wait with them." When he returned, the twins had finished their cocoa. Argo had stretched out close, letting Marin rest her fingers on his fur like he was an anchor. "Someone's coming," Beckett explained. "Her name's Dana Reed. She works with children. She's kind. She'll take you somewhere safe for tonight. Beds, quilts, a warm meal." "Do we have to tell everything?" Laya asked quietly. "Not tonight," Beckett said gently. "Only what you want. The rest can wait." Headlights soon broke the darkness. A modest gray sedan pulled up. From it stepped a woman in her early 40s, navy cardigan over a neat blouse, dark hair tied back, expression soft but sure. She carried a canvas tote. "Hello there," she said warmly, crouching to their level. "I'm Dana. May I sit?" The girls nodded. Dana sat gently, pulling granola bars, a thermos of soup, and 2 soft blankets from her tote. "I brought these for you. You don't have to say much tonight. I just want you warm, fed, and safe." Marin unwrapped a bar and shared it with Laya. Dana smiled. "That's kind. You look out for each other." Beckett stood back, letting Dana's calmness guide the moment. Argo stayed close, his nose drifting once more toward the blue handkerchief. "Would you like to bring your things with you?" Dana asked. Laya clutched the folded fabric. Marin showed a smooth white pebble she had hidden in her pocket. "It looks like the moon," she whispered. "Then let's bring the moon," Dana said gently. Together, they rose. Dana guided them to her car, letting them sit together in the back. She tucked the blankets around their laps, buckled them carefully. Beckett leaned down at the window. "I'll be right behind you," he promised. Argo sat at his side, lifting a paw as if waving. For the first time that night, Marin's lips curved upward in a small smile. The sedan pulled away, taillights glowing against the dark path. Beckett exhaled, resting a hand on Argo's back. The shepherd leaned against him, steady, warm. The bread and candles still sat on the table. The wax had hardened into a crooked shape. The flame was gone, but in its place was something that hadn't been there before, the fragile beginning of safety. Morning light crept over Cedar Hollow with a pale gold hue slipping through the blinds of Officer Beckett Shaw's modest kitchen. He poured himself a cup of strong black coffee, the steam rising like smoke from a campfire. But his mind was still in the shelter at Juniper Park. The image of two thin girls blowing out a candle stuck into bread haunted him. He had promised safety, yet promises meant little unless they were followed by proof. Somewhere out there was Hannah, their missing mother, and a truth that needed uncovering. Argo, his German shepherd partner, lay near the door with ears half-pricked, sensing his handler's mood. The dog had imprinted on the faint jasmine scent from the handkerchief Laya held. That note lingered in the air even now, reminding man and dog alike that the story was far from finished. Beckett grabbed his patrol jacket, clipped the leash to Argo's harness, and set out before the town had fully stirred awake. His first stop was the small transit station near Main Street, the kind of place where buses paused on their way to larger cities. The platform was nearly empty except for a custodian sweeping leaves into a dustpan and a few early commuters. "Let's see if you've still got it, partner," Beckett murmured. Heppled the folded handkerchief from a protective bag and let Argo sniff once more. The shepherd's body stiffened with recognition. Nose to the ground, he tugged toward the edge of the platform. The custodian, a man in his 50s with a sun-beaten face and an orange vest, looked up. "Morning, officer." "Lost someone." "Looking for someone," Beckett replied politely. He didn't share more. Experience had taught him that too many words could scatter the trail. Argo guided him across the lot, weaving between parked cars, then down a narrow road leading out of town. His tail was low but steady, his nose pulling like a compass needle fixed north. After nearly a mile, they reached a row of rental storage units on the outskirts. Faded red doors stretched in a line, painting the gravel lot littered with bottle, caps, and weeds. Beckett scanned the row. Nothing appeared unusual. Still, Argo pressed forward, circling near one of the middle units. The dog sniffed at the seam of the door, then pulled once at the ground, his ears shifting forward. The padlock was cheap, the kind easily rented along with the unit. Beckett used his key authority, called in to dispatch, and within minutes, a property manager arrived. He was a lean man with sandy hair and a baseball cap bearing the storage company logo. "Officer Shaw, right?" the manager asked nervously. "Heard the call. This one was rented last month, paid in cash. Can't say I saw the renter much. Mind opening it?" Beckett asked. The man fiddled with a ring of keys, slid one into the padlock, and twisted. The door creaked open, groaning on tired hinges. Inside was darkness and the faint smell of dust and motor oil. Beckett flicked on his flashlight. Boxes stacked haphazardly lined the wall. An old tarp covered a bicycle frame. Nothing screamed danger, but Argo patted inside with precision. He sniffed the floor, circled twice, then stopped near a thin rubber mat spread under a stack of crates. With a low whine, he scraped his paw against the mat. Beckett crouched. His heart knocked once hard in his chest. He slid the crates aside, peeled the mat upward, and revealed a shallow space cut into the wooden floor. There, wrapped in a thin cloth, lay Asmall battered cell phone and a folded piece of paper. He lifted the note carefully. The handwriting was hurried, shaky, but legible. Don't go back home. Keep the girls away from Trevor. Ashcombe. For a moment, Beckett stared at the words, the echo of Hannah's fear reaching across paper and ink. Alive, hiding, and warning. He exhaled slowly, tucking the note into an evidence bag. The phone went into another, though its battery was long dead. He stood, looked down at Argo, and whispered, "Good boy." The dog wagged his tail once, quiet but sure. While Beckett traced the scent of jasmine across gravel and dust, another story was unfolding back at the children's center. The building was plain brick on the outside, but inside it carried warmth. Murals painted by volunteers, bright rugs covering the floor, and shelves of donated toys lined against the wall. Morning light poured through the wide windows of the playroom. Marisol Whitaker, a volunteer with a gentle smile and eyes the color of chestnut, knelt by a low table. She was in her early 30s, with long black hair tied into a braid, and had the air of someone who listened more than she spoke. She handed Laya and Marin sheets of paper and a box of crayons. "Sometimes," she said softly, "it's easier to tell a story by drawing than by talking." Laya hunched forward, gripping a red crayon. Slowly, she drew the outline of a kitchen, the memory of a stove glowing, a table with plates, and a window with yellow curtains. Marin, sitting quietly at her side, drew something different. A tall dog, standing in front of a doorway, his body like a shield. Marisol glanced at their drawings. She didn't ask questions. She simply let them work, nodding as if each stroke of crayon was a sentence spoken aloud. She slipped the papers into a folder once the girls were done, careful not to wrinkle them. These would matter later. Just then, the door opened, and Evan, Whitaker, stepped in. He was a man of 36, tall with a thoughtful demeanor and a plaid shirt rolled up at the sleeves. His hair was dark brown, his smile reserved but warm. He worked in outdoor equipment sales, but his heart was in community service, alongside his wife. "Long morning?" he asked, leaning down to kiss Marisol's temple. "Busy," she murmured, glancing at the twins, who were now comparing crayons in hushed voices. "But they're brave." Evan's gaze softened. "The two girls you mentioned?" "Yes," she lowered, her voice further. "They've been through more than most adults. But look," Marin drew a dog protecting her. "Maybe Argo gave her that sense of safety." Evan nodded, his brow furrowing thoughtfully. "We'll see what the center and the court decide. For now, let's just be here if they need us." He didn't press. Both. He and Marisol had longed for children of their own, but they carried their hope quietly, never forcing it on anyone. Marisol touched his hand briefly. Exactly. No pressure, just kindness. They stood together, watching as Laya added a small candle above the kitchen table in her drawing. Moran, beside her, shaded the dog's eyes in gold. The room fell into a calm silence, broken only by the scratch of crayon tips, as if the children were slowly stitching pieces of themselves back together with color. By the time Beckett returned to the station, the sky had turned brighter, the kind of blue that made the town's rooftops gleam. He placed the evidence bags on his desk, the phone, the note, proof that Hannah had not abandoned her daughters willingly. She was running, and she was warning. Argo stretched at his feet, resting his head on his paws. The Jasmine Trail was not over, but at least for the first time, it had given them a voice. The morning mist lingered over Cedar Hollow's outskirts, curling between pines and stretching low along the creek bed. Officer Beckett's Shaw tightened the leash, clipped to Argo's harness, his boots crunching over wet leaves. The German shepherd's nose was pressed to the ground, his body taut with focus. Every breath he drew carried him further from the noise of town, closer to the trace of jasmine that clung to the memory of Hannah Cole. Beside Beckett walked Sheriff Jim Carver. Jim was in his late 40s, a broad-shouldered man with sandy hair thinning. At the crown, his uniform jacket a little too snug from years of long shifts and gas station dinners. He carried himself with steady authority, but tempered it with a drawl that calmed most people he spoke to. Unlike Beckett, who kept his grief locked away, Jim was a man who carried every case in his eyes. He felt the weight of Cedar Hollow like it was his kin. "You really think she's still close?" Jim asked quietly. "Argo hasn't let go of the trail," Beckett said, watching the dog pull them toward a narrow path. "If she passed here, he'll know." The creek whispered beside them, shallow water sliding over stone. The path narrowed into a corridor of brambles, then opened onto a clearing. There, half hidden by brush, stood a cabin. Its boards were gray with weather, its roof sagged, and a shutter hung crooked on one nail. Argo stopped dead in front of the door, lowered onto his stomach, and let out a low whine. He pawed forward once, then turned his head back at Beckett, a clear sign. Beckett approached, hand on his holster, though his gut told him no one waited inside. He pushed the door. It groaned and swung wide. Dust rose in the thin light that slanted through broken slats. The places smelled of damp wood and something faint, antiseptic, cotton, a life that had tried to hide in the cracks. Argo padded forward, nose working furiously. He stopped at a cupboard shoved against the wall. The shepherd lay down, pressed his muzzle to the seam, and whimpered. Beckett knelt, tugged the door open. Inside lay a woman's coat, faded blue and smelling, faintly of jasmine, though dulled by creek air. Beside it, an empty water bottle and a small roll of bandages half used. Beckett picked them up carefully, sliding them into evidence bags. "She was here," he said, voice low but certain. "Not long ago. She patched herself up, tried to keep going." Jim leaned against the doorframe, jaw tight. "If she's running from Pike, she's running scared." He paused. "That note you found yesterday? It's enough for me to toast the judge for a warrant. Between the phone, the warning, and now this cabin, I can tie him to obstruction or worse." Beckett exhaled. "Get it done. The longer she's out here, the greater the risk." Jim nodded, pulling his phone from his belt. He stepped outside, voice clipped, as he requested the warrant for Trevor Pike's residence. Beckett stayed in the cabin, running a hand across the worn wood of the cupboard. He imagined Hannah crouched here with her arms around her knees, too afraid to rest, but too tired to move. Argo sat beside him, head tilted, eyes calm. Beckett rested a hand on the dog's back. "We'll find her," he murmured. "We have to." At the children's center in town, life moved at a gentler rhythm. The common room buzzed with soft chatter and the squeak of markers on paper. Dana Reed, the child services worker, stood before a whiteboard. She wore her usual navy cardigan, her hair in its tidy bun, but she'd traded paperwork for playtime. In her hand was a marker, and on the board she had written 3 short lines. "Speak up, run to the light, find someone safe." "These," she said warmly to the circle of children gathered, "are our 3 steps if you feel scared." Her eyes rested on Leia and Marin, who sat pressed together on the rug. "Say them with me. Speak up." The children echoed. "Run to the light. Find someone safe." Dana handed out bright plastic wristbands, each one stamped with a phone number for emergencies. "These have important numbers. They're waterproof. They don't break easy, and they tell the world you have someone to call." Leia turned the band over in her hand, tracing the numbers with her finger. Marin slipped hers on immediately, her small wrist dwarfed by the band, but she smiled faintly as if it meant more than plastic. It meant connection. That evening, after dinner, Marisol Whitaker returned for her volunteer shift. She carried a small stack of storybooks stuck under her arm, her braid falling over her shoulder. She gathered the children in a corner of the common room, her voice steady and soft as she read about adventures in faraway lands. Leia leaned into Marion, eyes half-lidded, letting the rhythm of Marisol's voice calm the edges of her fear. For the first time in many days, she felt safe enough to close her eyes without forcing them open again. Meanwhile, Evan Whitaker was down in the basement storage room, sleeves rolled up, a screwdriver in hand. He had found Asmall's rusted bicycle. Among the donations, its tires flat, chains stiff with rust. He worked methodically, oiling the links, patching the inner tubes, adjusting the seat. His tall frame bent awkwardly over the tiny bike, but his eyes held a rare smile as he imagined two girls riding side by side on the street outside. When Marisol finished her story and tucked the children in with blankets, she joined Evan in the basement. He wiped grease from his fingers with a rag and showed her the nearly restored bike. "They'll need helmets," he said. "But tomorrow, if the weather holds, maybe they can try this one." Marisol touched his arm, her gaze soft. "You're always fixing things, Evan. Maybe this time it's more than a bike." Later that night, Beckett returned to the station where Jim was finishing his call. The sheriff's voice was firm, official. The warrant for Trevor Pike's home would be ready by morning. Beckett placed the evidence bags on the desk. Coat, bottle, bandages, proof that Hannah had been alive, hiding, trying to stay one step ahead. He sat heavily, Argo settling at his feet, both of them weary but unwilling to stop. The creek and the cabin had spoken in their own quiet way. Hannah had survived this long, but survival could not last forever. Now, with the law turning its gaze on Trevor Pike, the hunt for truth was about to quicken. The morning broke colder than expected, a thin veil of frost glistening across the front lawns of Cedar Hollow. The streets were quiet as Officer Beckett Shaw parked outside the Pike residence. The modest home sat at the end of a narrow street, its paint chipped and gutters sagging. A moss-green pickup truck was parked crookedly in the gravel drive, its bumper dented, the license plate hanging loosely from one corner. Sheriff Jim Carver was already there, speaking with two deputies who had arrived with the warrant signed only hours earlier. Jim's expression was set, firm, though lines of weariness, carved deep around his mouth. He caught Beckett's eye, gave a small nod, then signaled to move in. Trevor Pike wasn't home. Neighbors had mentioned seeing him leave before dawn, muttering about errands. That absence allowed the search team to work quickly. Beckett released Argo from the patrol car, the shepherd bounding forward with quiet discipline. His nose swept low, tail twitching once before fixing on the truck. He circled it, then halted at the rear, body stiff with recognition. Hepawed at the bed, then thumped his tail against the metal siding with purpose. "Something's under there," Beckett murmured. He and Jim climbed into the truck bed, peeling back a grimy floor mat spread across the metal. Underneath, their boots rang against a panel that didn't belong. With some force, they pried it open to reveal a crude false compartment. Inside lay several items hastily packed, boxed electronics with barcodes scratched off, a pair of power tools still carrying hardware, store stickers, and a velvet case that held mismatched jewelry. Beckett's jaw tightened, clear evidence of theft. But what stopped him wasn't the stolen goods. It was the smaller bundle wrapped in cloth. He pulled it free and unwrapped it carefully. A woman's sweater, soft but frayed at the sleeves, released, a faint fragrance into the air. Jasmine Beckett froze, glancing at Argo, who pressed his nose into the fabric and wagged his tail with sharp recognition. Hannah had been near, close enough to leave a trace. Jim crouched beside him, lifting another object from the compartment. A slim flash drive tucked into a coin pouch. He handed it over. "We'll check this back at the station." Deputy Alvarez, a young, Officer, with a sharp gaze and steady posture, brought over a digital recorder found wedged in the corner of the compartment. Beckett powered it on. Static crackled. Then a voice filled the air. Trevor's harsh and full of venom. "If you breathe one word, Hannah, one word, I'll make sure those girls know fear so deep they'll never open their mouths again." The threat lingered, a poison that chilled even the crisp morning air. Beckett shut their quarter off, fists clenched. The girls had been right to run. Hannah had been right to hide. Jim blew out a long breath. That's more than enough for a formal charge. He bagged the recorder, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed the storm inside. "We're closing in." At the Children's Center, the atmosphere was softer, though still threaded with unease. Dana Reed gathered Beckett, Jim, and a few trusted staff in her office. The blinds were drawn, the table covered with files. On one wall hung a cork board lined with notes, names, timelines, evidence pieces connected with pins. "Trevor won't go down." "Easy," Dana said, folding her hands. She wore her navy cardigan again, though her sleeves were rolled up now, as if bracing for a fight. "We need a plan that keeps the girls safe while also getting him where we need him." Beckett leaned against the wall, arms crossed, the sweater's jasmine scent still in his memory. "He uses that truck, Hestash's stolen goods. Maybe sells them. If we pull him in blind, he'll claim we planted the evidence." Jim rubbed his jaw, so we draw him out. "Make him show up with his truck. Tie him to the compartment directly." "What?" Dana looked between them. "Where would he go willingly?" "The repair yard," Beckett answered. "Neighbors said he takes the truck there. When he needs to swap out plates or patch it up, if we get him there, catch him near the vehicle. Iddies him to everything we found at that." Evan Whitaker, invited to the meeting for his mechanical knowledge, cleared his throat. He stood tall in a flannel shirt, his hands rough with grease from his shop. Though not a police officer, his thoughtful nature carried weight. "These older trucks," Evan explained. "Guys like Trevor will keep spare plates. They'll drill quick release brackets so they can switch in a parking lot in under 5 minutes. If you watch for that, you'll know when he's about to make a move. He'll think he's clever, but the trick leaves scratches around the bolts, easy to spot." Beckett nodded. "That's useful. We'll position near the yard, let him believe no one's looking, then move in once he tries the switch." Jim made notes. "We'll need eyes on the street. Quiet surveillance. The girls stay here under Dana's supervision. No exceptions." That evening, Marisol Whitaker stayed late with the children. She gathered Laya and Marin in their eating corner, where warm lamps glowed against the walls. Her voice carried gently over the storybook in her hands, weaving a tale about a girl who found friends in unlikely places. When she paused, she noticed Marin watching her closely. The girl's voice was small but clear. "Are there always bad people?" Marisol closed the book. "There are. But there are also people who will stand in front of you who won't let the bad stay in control." She smiled softly. "You've already met some of them. You'll meet more." Laya shifted, curling her arm protectively around. Her sister. "How do we know who they are?" "You'll know," Marisol said simply. "Because they'll make you feel safe, not afraid. Because they'll give without asking for anything back." The girls nodded, their eyes heavy with the kind of exhaustion that came from too many nights of uncertainty. Marisol tucked blankets around them, humming quietly. In the hallway, she met Evan, who was finishing a phone call. "They're asleep," she whispered. Evan looked at her, his brow furrowed but his voice steady. Beckett said, "Tomorrow might be the day." Marisol reached for his hand. "Then let's just make sure tonight they believe the world still has good people." Back at the station, Beckett loaded the flash drive into a secure laptop. Images filled the screen. Photos snapped in secret, showing Hannah with her arm yanked, her face strained as Trevor leaned too close. The timestamps weren't old. She had been seen, documented, controlled. But the last photo was empty. The frame showed only an open door and darkness beyond, as if she had slipped free. The jasmine scent on the sweater told the rest. She had been near. She was still moving, and Trevor was desperate to keep the truth hidden. Beckett shut the laptop, his reflection staring back in the dark screen. Tomorrow they would draw Trevor out. Tomorrow the girls would see that promises could be kept. The night was heavy with fog, the kind that clung low to the ground and blurred the streetlights around Cedar Hollow. Officer Beckett Shaw crouched low behind an abandoned workbench at the edge of the repair yard, Argo pressed to his side. The shepherd's muscles quivered, his ears trained forward as if he could already hear the rumble of the moss-green truck that would soon arrive. Sheriff Jim Carver stood a few yards away, his bulk hidden in the shadows of a corrugated shed. His service pistol rested against his thigh, his eyes narrowed with focus. Years on the job had carved the casual ease out of him, but tonight he carried himself with the gravity of a man who knew exactly how fragile children's futures could be. The plan had been carefully laid. Lure Trevor Pike into a place he felt comfortable, a place where he often tinkered with stolen goods and switched license plates. The repair yard sat on the far end of town, its chain-link fence rattling in the breeze, the smell of oil and rust thick in the air. Tonight, it would be Trevor's trap. The sound came first, an engine coughing, then growing steady. The moss-green pickup rolled into the yard, its headlights off. Trevor climbed out broad-shouldered and hunched in a worn flannel shirt, his face gaunt, but his eyes sharp with paranoia. He muttered under his breath, opened the truck bed, and reached for the false floor. That was when Argo moved, the shepherd, let out a sharp, guttural bark, not the sound of attack, but the command of a sentinel. He surged forward on his lead, landing squarely between Trevor and the open compartment, his hackles raised but teeth untouched. The suddenness froze Trevor mid-step. "Don't move, Pike." Beckett's voice cut through the night. Trevor spun, eyes wild. But before he could bolt, Jim stepped from the shadows, gun raised, hands where I can see them now. For a moment, Trevor looked cornered like a fox circling for an opening. Then Argo lunged a step closer, pulling hard against the leash, his deep growl echoing against the metal siding. The message was clear. Retreat, not advance. Trevor stumbled back, throwing his hands up. Beckett moved in swiftly, cuffing Trevor's wrist behind his back. "Trevor Pike, you're under arrest for child endangerment, unlawful confinement, and possession of stolen property," Beckett recited, his voice tight but steady. Jim opened the compartment fully, pulling out a small box stuffed with papers and keys. Among them was a key fob labeled with the name of a roadside motel. Just outside town. Beckett held it up. "This where she is?" he asked coldly. Trevor sneered but said nothing. Beckett didn't press. The key itself was answer enough. The motel sat half empty, its neon sign flickering against the fog. Paint peeled from the doors and the lot was littered with beer cans. Beckett led the way up the cracked concrete steps, Jim covering him. Argo padded silently beside them, his head low. The key fit the lock to a second-floor room. Beckett turned it slowly, eased the door open. Inside, there smelled of dust and stale food. A woman sat on the edge of the bed, her frame thin, shoulders slumped, a blanket wrapped around her like armor. Her hair was dark, tangled at the ends, and her face was pale with exhaustion. But here Yeez, sharp and searching, shot to the door the moment it opened. Hannah Cole gripped the blanket tighter, her lips trembled. But her first words were not about herself. "My girls," she whispered hoarsely. "Are they safe?" Beckett stepped forward, lowering his weapon. "They're safe. Laya and Marin are at the children's center. They've had food, warmth, and people watching over them." Her body sagged with relief, tears springing to her eyes, though she forced them back. "He told me if I tried to tell anyone, he'd make sure they lived in fear. That's why I ran. That's why I hid." Jim's voice softened. though it still carried authority. "Hannah, you don't have to run anymore. We have the evidence, and with your testimony, he won't be able to touch you or the girls again." She nodded shakily, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. "I'll do it. I'll testify. Anything to keep them safe." Argo approached cautiously. "Tailo." Hannah reached down, tentative, brushing her hand against his head. The dog leaned into her palm, and for the first time in months, she let herself believe protection could be real. The following afternoon, Dana Reed prepared a quiet room at the Children's Center. The curtains were drawn to filter soft light. A therapist from the county sat nearby, and the scent of crayons and clean laundry lingered in the air. When Hannah entered, escorted gently by Beckett, she paused in the doorway. Layla and Marin sat on the couch, their eyes wide, their bodies tense as if afraid this was just another trick. Then Hannah whispered, "My darlings." The twins shot forward at once. They collided into their mother's arms, clutching her so tightly she nearly lost her balance. Laya pressed her face into Hannah's shoulder. Marin buried her nose into the blanket still wrapped around her. They didn't speak at first. The tears said enough. Dana placed a hand over her heart and quietly motioned for the others to step back. Some reunions didn't need witnesses. Later, when the girls had calmed, Hannah spoke softly of her time in hiding, her fear, and how she had always thought of them. The therapist guided the conversation gently, ensuring no detail came out too sharp. No wound reopened too fast. Outside the room, Marisol and Evan waited. When Beckett stepped into the hall, Evan asked, "How are they?" "They're together," Beckett said simply. Marisol's eyes glistened. "That's all that matters for now," she hesitated, then added, "If the court and CPS allow, Evan and I would like to offer a foster placement. Just until things settle, they need a roof, routines, warmth. We can give them that Beckett studied them." Marisol's braid was messy from a long shift. Evan's hands were still marked with grease from the bike he'd repaired, but both wore expressions steady and sincere. They were the kind of people who meant what they said. "I'll make sure Dana knows," Beckett replied. As the door reopened, the sound of Laya's laughter drifted out, thin but genuine. It was the first true laugh Beckett had heard from her, and it struck him more deeply than any verdict a courtroom could hand down. The courthouse of Cedar Hollow was packed on the day of sentencing. The walls, painted beige and lined with polished oak benches, carried a heavy silence that broke only with a shuffle of papers and the faint cough of someone in the gallery. Trevor Pike was old and wearing a county-issued jumpsuit, wrist-cuffed, his once defiant smirk replaced by a gaunt glare. Across the aisle sat Hannah Cole, thinner than she'd been, but steadier now, her dark hair brushed and pinned back. She clutched a notebook in her lap, her fingers pale against the spiral binding. Beside her, Dana Reed whispered something reassuring, her calm presence acting like a tether against the weight of the day. Judge Harmon, a tall man with silver hair and sharp spectacles, presided from the bench. His reputation was firm but fair, a man who valued evidence above theatrics. He adjusted his glasses, read through the files, then cleared his throat. "Mr. Pike," the judge said, his voice ringing clearly, "the court has reviewed the evidence presented, photographs, recordings, testimonies. You are hereby found guilty on the charges of child abuse, unlawful confinement, witness intimidation, and trafficking in stolen property. For these crimes, you are sentenced to 11 years in state prison, followed by 5 years probation. Furthermore, you are permanently prohibited from any contact with Leah and Marin Cole, and with their mother, Hannah Cole." Trevor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His eyes darted once toward Hannah, who lowered her gaze but did not waver. Judge Harmon continued, "As for your associate, Ricky Malden, who facilitated the sale of stolen property at the repair yard, this court sentences him to 3 years in state prison, as well as financial restitution for his role in aiding and profiting. from these crimes. A murmur swept through the room. Ricky Malden, sitting a few rows back, slumped in his chair as deputies moved to escort him out. The judge shifted his attention to Hannah. His tone softened, though it retained authority. Mrs. Cole, this court recognizes that you were a victim, under threat and coercion. You are not charged as an accomplice. However, as part of your continued care, the court requires you to undergo regular counseling sessions and to establish stable employment before any long-term custody decisions can be reconsidered. Hannah nodded, tears shining but unshed. The judge then looked to Marisol and Evan Whitaker, seated together in the front row. Evan's large frame was stiff in a formal suit that seemed unfamiliar on him, while Marisol sat composed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For the best interests of the children, Judge Harmon said, the court has decided upon an open adoption model. Marisol and Evan Whitaker are granted full parental custody of Laya and Maren Cole following a successful foster period. Hannah Cole will retain the right to supervise visitation on a regular schedule with the potential to expand as her stability improves. A ripple of relief passed through the room. Marisol blinked back tears and squeezed Evan's hand. Evan, unused to public displays, simply nodded gravely, his eyes wet but his jaw firm. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. The courtroom exhaled. A year later, Cedar Hollow was alive with spring sunlight. The Whitaker house, a sturdy two-story with a porch overlooking the valley, glowed with laughter inside. The dining room table was crowded with plates and balloons, but at its center sat a birthday cake frosted in white, decorated with strawberries and little chocolate curls. 9 candles flickered on top, and beside the cake, in a small glass frame, stood the stub of an old candle, the one once stuck into a slice of dry bread. It had become a reminder of fear overcome, of nights endured, of light found again. Laya and Moran, now taller and stronger, stood shoulder to shoulder, cheeks flushed with excitement. Each wore a dress picked with care by Marisol, who had learned their taste down to the last detail. Maren's shy smile peeked out more often these days, and Laya's protective edge had softened into confidence. Argo sat nearby, his sable coat shining, a bright blue bandana tied around his neck. His amber eyes scanned the room, alert but content. When the twins giggled, he wagged his tail in time, waiting for his share of cake crumbs later. Beckett Shaw stood near the doorway, his uniform traded for a simple button shirt. He smiled as he accepted a slice of cake from Evan. "You've done more. Then keep a promise," Marisol told him quietly. Beckett shook his head modestly. "It wasn't just me." Argo led the way. "And now we're trying to give other kids the same chance." He handed Evan a flyer. "K9 Kids Program. We're opening a club, dogs and children together to help them rebuild trust. Laya and Maren will always be welcome." The room hushed as Hannah entered, a visitor welcomed with care. Her frame was healthier now, her hair neatly tied, her notebook clutched against her chest. In it were pages of therapy notes and journal entries, the beginnings of her own healing. She smiled at her daughters, tentative but bright. The girls ran to her, hugging her waist. Hannah's voice trembled as she whispered, "Happy birthday, my loves." When everyone gathered around the table, the room filled with voices. This time, happy birthday wasn't sung in whispers or memory. It rang through the house, whole and complete. Laya and Maren shut their eyes, blew out the candles together, and laughter spilled into the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. For once there was no fear hiding in the corners, no shadows waiting at the door. There was only family, imperfect but real, gathered around a cake that was more than food. It was proof that light could return. Argo barked once, as if to seal the promise. Sometimes, what feels like a small flicker of hope is the very miracle God places in our path. Just as a single candle once lit the darkness for Leia and Maren, His light can reach into the shadows of our own lives, reminding us that no night is too long, no fear too deep for His grace to overcome. In everyday life, miracles don't always appear as thunder or lightning. They come as the kindness of a stranger, the loyalty of a dog, the courage of a mother, or the strength to begin again after everything seems lost. And if we open our hearts, we can see that God's hand is present in the ordinary, weaving redemption from even the hardest of stories. If this story touched you, I invite you to share your thoughts, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue spreading hope together. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may His light guide you through every season of your